Chef Adrian Vale thought humiliating the quiet dishwasher on a live cooking stream would make him look untouchable. But before the night was over, the same woman he mocked would take control of the entire kitchen, while some of the most powerful food critics in America watched in complete silence. The stainless steel counters of the Monroe Culinary Institute gleamed beneath rows of bright white studio lights as cameras rolled across the massive demonstration kitchen. Steam curled upward from copper pans. Knives struck cutting boards in sharp rhythmic bursts. Wealthy investors, celebrity guests, and culinary students filled the elevated viewing gallery above the floor, sipping sparkling water and waiting for the Institute's annual Master Chef Showcase to begin. At the center of it all stood Chef Adrian Vale, America's most arrogant television chef, adjusting the cuffs of his black tailored jacket while producers rushed around him nervously. At 48, Adrian had built an empire out of perfection and intimidation. His restaurants stretched from Manhattan to Beverly Hills. His cooking competitions dominated cable television, and his reputation for humiliating weaker chefs had become almost as famous as his food. Tonight, he announced into the camera with a polished smile, "We separate professionals from pretenders." The audience applauded instantly. Above the applause, another sound quietly echoed through the kitchen. The steady rush of running water. Near the back prep sinks, Claire Whitman stood alone, washing stacks of sauté pans while nobody paid attention to her existence. At 41, Claire blended into the background so completely that most students barely noticed her anymore. Her pale blonde hair was tied into a loose bun beneath a faded gray cap, and her oversized kitchen uniform hung loosely against her slender frame. She moved carefully, silently, almost invisibly. To the students, she was simply the dishwasher lady. One young contestant brushed past her carrying trays of herbs and muttered under his breath, "Careful, don't trip over the help." Several others laughed quietly. Claire lowered her eyes and continued rinsing the pans without responding. Across the room, Chef Adrian scanned the stations while producers prepared the live stream countdown clock. 5 minutes until broadcast, someone shouted. The tension inside the kitchen instantly sharpened. Students adjusted aprons. Sous chefs checked protein temperatures. Camera operators repositioned equipment around the massive marble island in the center of the room. Then disaster struck. A loud curse suddenly erupted from Station 3 as one contestant accidentally scorched an expensive red wine reduction moments before the opening tasting presentation. Smoke rose sharply from the pan. "No, no, no!" The contestant panicked, stirring furiously. The bitter smell spread across the kitchen almost instantly. Adrian turned slowly toward the station, disbelief hardening into fury across his face. "Are you kidding me?" He snapped loud enough for the entire room to hear. The livestream cameras had already started rolling. Investors leaned forward in their seats. One of the producers whispered nervously, "We're live in 30 seconds." The contestant froze, visibly shaking. Adrian stared at the ruined sauce, then looked around the kitchen with cold irritation before his eyes suddenly landed on Claire near the sink. A cruel smile slowly appeared across his face. "Well," he said loudly, straightening his jacket while the cameras pivoted toward him, "maybe our quiet dishwasher wants to save the dish." Laughter scattered across the viewing gallery. Several students exchanged smirks. One cameraman zoomed directly onto Claire's face as she slowly turned around, water still dripping from her hands. Adrian folded his arms confidently. "Come on," he continued mockingly. "You've been watching Real Chefs all month. Let's see what you've learned." The room filled with quiet chuckles. Claire stood perfectly still for a moment beneath the burning studio lights while dozens of strangers stared at her waiting for the humiliation to begin. Then, without a single word, she reached for a clean kitchen towel and slowly dried her hands. The laughter around the kitchen lingered for another second before something strange began to happen. Claire Whitman did not react like someone being publicly humiliated. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply folded the towel neatly beside the sink and walked toward the ruined station with calm, measured steps that somehow cut through the noise of the room sharper than shouting ever could. Chef Adrian Vale watched her approach with amused confidence, expecting panic, maybe embarrassment, perhaps even tears once the cameras pushed closer. Instead, Claire stopped beside the scorched pan and quietly examined the damaged sauce without touching it. The bright studio lights reflected across the stainless steel counters while producers exchanged uncertain glances behind the cameras. "You have 11 minutes now," Adrian announced smugly, checking the massive digital countdown mounted above the kitchen. "That is assuming you even know where to begin." More scattered laughter followed from the culinary students seated near the gallery railings. Claire still said nothing. She reached for a tasting spoon, dipped it gently into the sauce, and brought it to her lips. The room gradually settled into curious silence. One of the younger sous chefs frowned slightly as he watched her posture change. It was subtle, almost invisible, but suddenly the quiet dishwasher no longer looked uncertain. She looked focused, precise, familiar. Claire stepped sideways and opened the refrigeration drawer beneath the station. Her eyes moved rapidly across the ingredients inside with the speed of someone calculating 3 steps ahead. Shallots, fresh thyme, veal stock, butter, burgundy wine. Without hesitation, she pulled exactly what she needed and placed each ingredient onto the counter in perfect order. Chop, chop, chop. Her knife moved across the cutting board with startling efficiency. Clean, controlled, effortless. The soft rhythmic sound echoed through the kitchen as several students slowly stopped smirking. Adrian's smile weakened slightly. Claire heated a fresh pan and added butter with practiced confidence. The sizzling sound rose sharply beneath the studio microphones. She tilted the pan once, watching the foam settle before adding shallots at exactly the right temperature. Not rushed, not nervous. Perfect. One of the camera operators lowered his headset slightly. "Wait," he whispered to another crew member. "Who is this woman?" Claire deglazed the pan with wine in one smooth motion, then reduced the flame instinctively, without even glancing at the controls. Steam curled upward beneath the lights while the rich aroma slowly spread through the room. The smell changed everything. Conversation stopped. Even the investors seated in the upper gallery leaned forward now. A silver-haired food critic narrowed his eyes with sudden interest. "That technique," he murmured quietly. "That is old-school French reduction." Beside him, another critic slowly lowered her wine glass. "No culinary assistant cooks like that," she replied. Across the kitchen, Adrian folded his arms tighter, irritation beginning to replace amusement. "You got lucky with the sauce," he said loudly, attempting to regain control of the room. "But presentation matters too." Claire did not even look at him. She reached for the overcooked protein left abandoned by the contestant and pressed it gently with her fingertips. Her expression remained calm, but the smallest shake of her head revealed disappointment. Then she moved. Fast. Faster than anyone expected. New pans hit burners. Fresh herbs landed on cutting boards. She reorganized the cluttered station in seconds, clearing useless tools aside while quietly directing a nearby student without raising her voice. "Warm those plates," she said evenly. The student obeyed instantly before realizing what he had just done. A strange energy began spreading across the kitchen now, the kind that appears only when someone truly exceptional enters control of a chaotic room. The digital clock continued ticking above them. 8 minutes remaining. But for the first time all evening, nobody was looking at Chef Adrian Vale anymore. The massive countdown clock above the kitchen dropped to 7 minutes remaining as tension thickened beneath the bright studio lights. Claire Whitman moved through the station with such quiet authority that the atmosphere itself seemed to bend around her. Students who had laughed only moments earlier now stood frozen, watching her hands. Instead of the cameras, every motion carried discipline. Every decision carried purpose. Chef Adrian Vale noticed it too, and for the first time that evening, uncertainty crept into his expression. Claire slid a cast-iron pan onto the burner and checked the flame with a single glance before turning toward the protein station. "Who rested these steaks?" she asked calmly. A nervous contestant slowly raised his hand. Claire nodded once without criticism. "Too early," she said quietly. The juices already escaped. There was no arrogance in her voice. No cruelty. Just certainty. She reached for fresh cuts from refrigeration and began seasoning them with quick precision while another contestant instinctively moved beside her, holding a tray of herbs. "Rosemary," Claire said softly without looking up. The student immediately handed it over like an assistant working under a head chef for years. Nearby, one of the executive producers leaned toward Adrian. "Did you know she could cook like this?" Adrian kept his eyes locked on Claire. "She washes dishes," he replied coldly, though the confidence in his voice had weakened noticeably. The rich scent of butter and herbs slowly filled the studio as Claire tilted the pan, basting the steaks with controlled movements. Oil crackled beneath the microphones. Steam curled upward around her face, while the kitchen remained eerily quiet except for the sounds she created. No frantic shouting. No chaos. Just rhythm. One of the younger culinary students swallowed nervously. "Why does this feel like a real restaurant now?" he whispered. Above them, the live stream comments exploded across giant side monitors beside the viewing gallery. At first, the audience online had mocked Claire too, but the tone was changing rapidly. "Wait, who is this woman? That knife work is insane. Chef Adrian does not even move like that. This is the calmest person in the building." A silver-haired food critic named Leonard Graves slowly stood from his seat in the gallery, his eyes narrowing with growing disbelief. Leonard had spent 30 years reviewing Michelin-star restaurants across America and Europe. He had watched world-famous chefs crack under less pressure than this. Yet the woman below moved like pressure did not exist. "I know that technique," Leonard muttered quietly. Beside him, another critic looked confused. "From where?" Leonard did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Claire as she spooned sauce across the plate with elegant restraint. "Paris," he finally whispered. "About 15 years ago." Down below, Adrian suddenly stepped forward, desperate to pull attention back toward himself. "Careful with the plating," he interrupted loudly. "Fine dining is about sophistication, not speed." Claire finally looked at him directly for the first time all evening. Her pale blue eyes remained calm, almost gentle, but something about the silence after his comment unsettled him more than anger would have. Then she returned to the plate without responding. The room somehow grew even quieter. Adrian's jaw tightened. He was losing control of his own kitchen, and everyone could feel it now. Claire adjusted microgreens with delicate precision before turning toward dessert station. "The soufflés are collapsing," she said evenly. A pastries student blinked in shock. "How did you even notice that?" Claire walked over, opened the oven slightly, then lowered the temperature by a few degrees. "Because they were rushed," she replied softly. "Good food punishes panic." The student stared at her speechlessly. Above them, the digital clock dropped to 4 minutes remaining. Yet instead of growing more frantic, the kitchen became calmer under Claire's presence. Even the cameras seemed to follow her naturally now, abandoning Adrian more and more with every passing second. And standing beneath the harsh white lights of his own televised showcase, Chef Adrian Vale began to realize the most dangerous person in the room had never been one of his elite culinary students at all. 3 minutes remained on the massive digital clock when the atmosphere inside the Monroe Culinary Institute shifted completely. The kitchen no longer sounded like a television production. It sounded like a professional brigade under the command of someone who understood pressure better than anyone else in the room. Claire Whitman moved from station to station with quiet efficiency, while students and assistants unconsciously stepped aside to clear her path. Stainless steel counters reflected the sharp white studio lights as camera operators abandoned their original filming angles just to follow her movements. Every lens in the room seemed drawn toward her now. Chef Adrian Vale noticed it with growing frustration. His showcase was slipping away from him in real time. "Back to your stations," he snapped suddenly, clapping his hands hard enough to break the silence. "This is still my kitchen." But nobody moved immediately. That was the moment he felt it. The invisible shift in authority. Claire lifted a spoon and sampled one of the unfinished purees before quietly adding acid and salt with perfect balance. "Now it works," she said calmly, sliding the dish back toward the stunned student beside her. The young woman tasted it, and her eyes widened instantly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Nearby, another contestant accidentally overcooked scallops in panic. Claire stepped over without hesitation, lowered the heat, and demonstrated a quick butter-based technique, so smooth it looked effortless. "You are fighting the pan," she explained softly. "Cooking rewards patience, not fear." The contestant nodded speechlessly, hanging on to every word. Up in the gallery, food critics had stopped taking casual notes. They were now fully engaged, watching Claire with the same focus usually reserved for celebrity chefs or Michelin judges. Leonard Graves leaned forward slowly, unable to hide his disbelief anymore. "It is her," he murmured. "There is no way that movement belongs to anyone else." Beside him, a younger journalist frowned. Who are you talking about? Leonard kept staring at Claire. 15 years ago, there was a chef in Manhattan called Claire Whitman. People said she could command a kitchen with fewer words than anyone in America. Her restaurant had a waiting list 6 months long. The journalist blinked in surprise. What happened to her? Leonard's expression darkened slightly. One night, she disappeared from the industry completely. Below them, Claire plated the final entree with elegant precision while the live stream audience online exploded with theories about her identity. Millions of viewers were now watching clips spread across social media in real time. Dishwasher lady is secretly a master chef. Chef Adrian looks terrified now. Someone figure out who this woman is. Adrian overheard one of the producers reading comments from a monitor, and his face tightened. This was supposed to be his moment. His investors. His students. His spotlight. Yet somehow the quiet woman he mocked had become the center of the entire room without ever raising her voice once. Enough, Adrian snapped suddenly, stepping directly beside Claire. You made your point. The room froze. Claire calmly continued adjusting microgreens on the final plate. Adrian forced a tight smile toward the cameras. Everyone loves a little underdog story, he said loudly, attempting to regain control of the broadcast. But let us not confuse kitchen assistants with culinary leadership. Claire finally stopped moving. The room fell completely silent again. Adrian expected embarrassment this time. Maybe retreat. Instead, Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward him with the same calm expression she had carried all night. Leadership? She asked quietly. Adrian crossed his arms defensively. Yes. Claire glanced around the kitchen at the exhausted students, the chaotic stations, the ruined timing schedules, and the nervous producers scrambling under pressure. Then she spoke softly enough that everyone leaned closer just to hear her. A real chef does not humiliate people when things go wrong, she said. A real chef steadies the room. Silence crashed across the kitchen like a wave. Even the cameras stopped shifting. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. And standing beneath the cold studio lights, surrounded by critics, investors, students, and millions of live-stream viewers, Chef Adrian Vale realized the quiet dishwasher had just exposed him in front of the entire country without insulting him once. For several long seconds after Claire Whitman spoke, nobody inside the Monroe Culinary Institute moved at all. The kitchen stood frozen beneath the bright studio lights while the sound of simmering butter quietly filled the silence Adrian Vale could no longer control. Millions of live-stream viewers watched the celebrity chef standing speechless in his own showcase, while the woman he mocked calmly returned to plating the final dishes without waiting for permission. The countdown clock above the kitchen dropped below 60 seconds. Final service in 1 minute. A producer announced nervously into her headset, though her voice sounded almost distant now. Nobody was focused on the show anymore. They were focused on Claire. She adjusted the final garnish with elegant restraint before stepping back slightly to examine the plates lined across the marble counter. Every dish looked refined without appearing forced, sophisticated without arrogance. The colors balanced naturally beneath the lights. Even the critics in the gallery seemed visibly unsettled by what they were witnessing. Leonard Graves slowly removed his glasses, still staring at Claire in disbelief. I reviewed her restaurant once, he said quietly to the journalist beside him. 15 years ago in Manhattan. Whitman House. Reservation books were impossible to get into. The younger journalist looked stunned. That Claire Whitman? Leonard nodded faintly. She earned 2 Michelin stars in under 18 months. Then why is she washing dishes here? Leonard's expression darkened. Her son died suddenly. After that, she vanished from the culinary world overnight. No interviews. No farewell. Nothing. Down below, one of the culinary students overheard the conversation and slowly turned pale. Wait, he whispered. The Claire Whitman? The realization spread through the gallery like electricity. Students who had mocked her earlier now exchanged uneasy glances while replaying every cruel joke they had made in their heads. One contestant quietly lowered his eyes in shame. Another muttered, "Oh no." Adrian heard the whispers building around him and felt the room slipping further away with every passing second. His jaw tightened as producers rushed toward the tasting counter. "We need the judges seated," someone shouted. "We are out of time." Claire calmly picked up the first finished plate and placed it onto the presentation table herself. The camera followed her automatically. Nobody instructed it to. It simply happened naturally now, as though the entire production understood where the real story was. One by one, the dishes reached the judges. The room fell silent again as forks lifted carefully beneath the harsh white lights. Investors leaned forward. Students held their breath. Even the live stream comments slowed as millions waited for the reactions. Leonard Graves took the first bite. His eyes widened immediately. Across from him, another critic slowly placed her fork down and covered her mouth in disbelief. A third judge looked directly toward Claire before speaking softly into the silence. "This tastes like discipline," he said. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. The reactions were too stunned for noise. Adrian attempted to force a smile as cameras drifted toward the judges. As expected from the Monroe Culinary Institute, he began carefully. But Leonard interrupted him immediately without even looking away from Claire. "Do not do that," he said calmly. Adrian froze. Leonard set his fork down with deliberate precision. "You humiliated that woman publicly before she rescued your entire service." The room became painfully quiet. Adrian's face lost color beneath the studio lights. Leonard slowly stood from his chair and faced Claire directly. "Chef Whitman," he said respectfully, "I honestly believe the culinary world had lost you forever." Every student in the gallery went completely still. Several producers stared at each other in shock. One contestant nearly dropped his plate. Because in that single moment, the quiet dishwasher officially ceased to exist. And standing beneath the same lights where she had been mocked only an hour earlier, Claire Whitman was finally recognized for who she truly was. The silence that followed Leonard Graves' words carried more weight than applause ever could. Under the blazing studio lights of the Monroe Culinary Institute, every student, investor, producer, and camera operator stared at Claire Whitman with a completely different understanding now. The quiet dishwasher they had ignored for weeks had once been one of the most respected chefs in America. And somehow, the only person in the room who had not realized it was the man who built his reputation on judging others. Chef Adrian Vale stood motionless beside the tasting counter, his confident television smile finally gone. Across the live stream monitors, comments poured faster than producers could read them. "That is Chef Claire Whitman? No way. Adrian humiliated a legend on live television. This is unbelievable." Claire herself showed no reaction to the sudden recognition surrounding her. She simply adjusted the towel folded beside the station and began quietly cleaning the counter she had worked on, as though none of this attention mattered to her anymore. That calmness unsettled Adrian more than anger would have. "Claire," Leonard said carefully from the gallery, his voice carrying genuine respect now. "Why would someone like you be washing dishes in a culinary school?" The room waited. Claire paused briefly before answering. "Because kitchens tell the truth about people," she said softly. "You learn more listening quietly than standing in the spotlight." Several students lowered their eyes immediately. One young contestant looked visibly ashamed, remembering how he had mocked her near the sinks earlier that evening. Another slowly removed his chef jacket and folded it nervously over his arm, as though suddenly embarrassed by his own arrogance. Adrian attempted to recover control of the situation. "Well," he said stiffly, forcing a laugh that nobody joined. "Clearly there has been a misunderstanding tonight." But nobody looked at him anymore. That was the part he could not tolerate. For years, Adrian Vale had controlled every room he entered through intimidation, prestige, and celebrity status. Yet Claire had dismantled his authority simply by remaining calm under pressure. One of the Institute investors suddenly stood from the front table. Richard Holloway was not only a major donor to Monroe Culinary Institute, he also owned a luxury hospitality group with restaurants across the country. "Chef Whitman," he said respectfully, "if you ever wish to return to the industry, there are people in this room who would compete for the opportunity to work with you." A murmur spread through the gallery instantly. Adrian's expression tightened further. Claire looked toward Richard politely, but shook her head once. "I did not come here looking for recognition," she replied. "Then why stay silent?" a student suddenly asked from the upper rows before hesitating nervously. Claire glanced toward the young woman kindly. "Because grief changes what matters," she answered softly. The room fell quiet again. Even the cameras seemed to hold still now. Claire rested one hand lightly against the counter before continuing. "After my son passed away, I stopped caring about awards, reservations, critics, all of it. Cooking used to be the center of my life. Then one day it was not. Nobody interrupted her. But being here reminded me of something. She continued calmly while looking around the kitchen. The best kitchens are not built on fear. They are built on trust. Those words landed directly against Adrian like quiet judgment. He opened his mouth once more as though preparing another defense, but before he could speak, one of his own sous chefs stepped forward unexpectedly. "She is right," the young man said carefully. Adrian stared at him in disbelief. Another assistant nodded slowly. Then another. One by one, the people who had spent years working beneath Adrian's intimidation began silently standing with Claire instead. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough for the entire room to understand what was happening. The power inside the kitchen had shifted completely, and for the first time in many years, Chef Adrian Vale stood beneath the harsh white lights without anyone left willing to pretend he was the most important person in the room. The energy inside the Monroe Culinary Institute no longer resembled a televised competition. It felt more like a reckoning. Students stood quietly around their stations while producers whispered anxiously into headsets, unsure whether to continue filming or simply let the moment unfold naturally. The livestream numbers continued climbing higher by the second as clips of Claire Whitman spread across social media faster than anyone inside the building could comprehend. But Claire herself remained completely untouched by the chaos surrounding her. She calmly wiped down the marble counter with slow, deliberate movements, while Chef Adrian Vale stood only a few feet away, looking smaller than he had all evening. For years he had dominated kitchens through fear and performance. Yet the woman beside him had dismantled his authority simply by demonstrating what genuine mastery looked like. Richard Holloway descended from the gallery level and approached the kitchen floor personally now, followed closely by several investors and journalists. Nobody asked Adrian for permission. That detail did not go unnoticed. "Chef Whitman," Richard said respectfully, "I think everyone here would like to hear what happened after you disappeared from New York." Claire paused briefly before folding the towel neatly beside the sink station where the night had begun. Her pale blue eyes moved quietly across the kitchen, lingering for a moment on the nervous culinary students watching her now with admiration instead of mockery. "There is not much to tell," she answered softly. Leonard Graves shook his head. "That is not true." The older critic stepped closer, his voice carrying genuine emotion now. "You changed modern American kitchens. Young chefs studied your menus the way musicians study classical compositions." Several students exchanged stunned looks hearing those words. One young contestant whispered under his breath, "We laughed at her." Claire gave the faintest smile, though sadness still rested quietly behind it. "People laugh when they only see the surface," she replied gently. The room fell silent again. Adrian suddenly stepped forward, clearly desperate to regain some piece of control before the evening completely slipped away from him forever. "Fine," he said stiffly. "You were successful once. Nobody is denying that. But running a famous restaurant 15 years ago does not make someone relevant today." A few uncomfortable glances spread through the room. The bitterness in his voice sounded louder now that nobody feared him anymore. Claire did not react emotionally. She simply looked toward the unfinished prep. Stations scattered across the kitchen. "Bring me the remaining ingredients," she said calmly. Adrian frowned. "What?" Claire turned slightly toward the students. "You still have guests waiting for dessert service." The students immediately moved. Not because they were ordered to by the school, not because cameras were rolling, but because they trusted her. Bowls appeared beside her station. Fresh berries, cream, dark chocolate, citrus zest, sugar. Claire tied a fresh apron around her waist and stepped beneath the center lights once more, while every camera operator instinctively repositioned around her. "You do not need 12 chefs to create something memorable," she said quietly as she began working. "You only need discipline and care." Her hands moved with breathtaking confidence. Chocolate tempered smoothly beneath her spatula. Sugar caramelized to perfect amber without burning. Knife work flashed beneath the lights with elegant precision. Students watched her like apprentices witnessing something sacred. Adrian attempted to interrupt twice, but nobody listened. Even the producers ignored him now. Claire plated the final dessert with restrained beauty before sliding the dishes forward. The scent alone transformed the room. Warm chocolate, orange zest, brown butter, sea salt. Leonard Graves tasted the dessert first, and closed his eyes immediately. One of the younger judges laughed softly in disbelief. Another simply whispered, "That is perfection." Adrian stared at the reactions in complete silence. Because deep down, he finally understood the truth everyone else in the room had already accepted. Claire Whitman had not lost her greatness after disappearing from the culinary world. She had simply stopped needing the world to notice it. The Monroe Culinary Institute had stopped feeling like a school hours ago. Beneath the bright studio lights and towering steel shelves, it now felt like history unfolding in real time. Producers no longer shouted instructions. Investors had forgotten their schedules. Even the live stream audience seemed hypnotized by the quiet woman standing at the center of the kitchen with flour dust lightly scattered across her dark apron. Claire Whitman did not look like a celebrity chef. She looked like someone who had survived enough pain to stop needing applause. Yet somehow that made every person in the room respect her even more. The dessert plates disappeared quickly from the judge's table, followed by stunned silence and slow disbelieving smiles. Leonard Graves leaned back in his chair and let out a soft breath. "I have reviewed restaurants on 3 continents," he said quietly, "and I have not tasted restraint and confidence like that in over a decade." Several students exchanged looks of amazement hearing praise like that from a critic known for destroying famous chefs with a single article. Richard Holloway stepped closer to Claire now, his expensive suit reflecting beneath the studio lights. "Chef Whitman," he said carefully, "if you wanted it, every major restaurant group in this country would fight to bring you back tonight." The statement echoed through the kitchen like thunder. Producers immediately looked toward Claire, waiting for her reaction, knowing the clip alone would dominate headlines by morning. But Claire simply untied her apron slowly. "I am not interested in building empires anymore," she answered softly. Adrian Vale scoffed under his breath. The bitterness in him had nowhere left to hide now. "Easy thing to say after disappearing for 15 years, he muttered. Several heads turned sharply toward him. Claire remained calm. "You think I disappeared because I lost talent," she said gently. "But talent was never the difficult part." Adrian folded his arms defensively. "Then what was?" Claire looked around the kitchen quietly before answering, remembering that people matter more than performance. The room fell silent once again. One of Adrian's younger assistants slowly removed his chef hat and stared down at the counter. Another contestant wiped at her eyes discreetly, embarrassed by how cruelly they had treated Claire earlier that evening. Leonard Graves studied Adrian carefully now. "Do you know why chefs respected Claire Whitman?" he asked. Adrian said nothing. Leonard continued anyway. "Because the people working under her became better instead of smaller." Those words landed hard. Adrian's face tightened beneath the lights while cameras captured every second of it. For years he had believed fear created excellence. Tonight the entire country had watched a quiet woman dismantle that belief without raising her voice once. One of the producers suddenly rushed toward Richard Holloway holding a tablet. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "the live stream just broke 12 million viewers." Shock spread through the room instantly. 12 million. The largest audience the Institute had ever seen by an enormous margin. Social media clips of Claire cooking had already gone viral nationwide. Journalists near the gallery scrambled to update headlines in real time. But Claire herself seemed almost untouched by the frenzy surrounding her. She simply picked up the folded towel from beside the sink station where she had started the evening and placed it neatly over her shoulder. "Chef Whitman," a nervous culinary student suddenly called out from the back row. Claire turned kindly toward him. The young man swallowed hard before speaking again. "How did you stay so calm when everyone was laughing at you?" For the first time all night, Claire paused for several seconds before answering. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the gleaming kitchen floor beneath the harsh white lights. "Because other people's arrogance tells you who they are," she said softly. "It does not tell you who you are." A hush fell across the entire room. Some students lowered their heads immediately. Others looked at her with open admiration now. And standing only a few feet away from the woman he had mocked publicly for millions to see, Chef Adrian Vale realized there was nothing left in the room he could control anymore except the shame settling quietly across his own face. The Monroe Culinary Institute remained silent long after Claire Whitman finished speaking. The bright studio lights still burned against the polished steel counters, but the atmosphere inside the kitchen had completely transformed. Hours earlier, People had laughed at a quiet woman washing dishes near the back sinks. Now the same room stood motionless around her with the kind of respect that could not be demanded or purchased. It could only be earned. Producers slowly lowered their headsets. Camera operators stopped adjusting their angles. Even the live stream audience, now numbering in the millions, seemed to sense that the night had become something far bigger than entertainment. Claire glanced once more around the kitchen where students stood frozen beside prep stations they would never look at the same way again. Some appeared embarrassed, others inspired. Most looked both. Richard Holloway stepped closer carefully. "Chef Whitman," he said, "if there is anything this institute can offer you, the door is open." Claire gave him a polite smile. "Thank you." Leonard Graves removed the notebook from his jacket pocket and closed it slowly. "I spent years telling people your disappearance was the greatest loss modern American cuisine ever suffered," he said. "Tonight, I realized something." Claire looked toward him quietly. Leonard smiled faintly. "The industry did not lose you. It simply stopped deserving you." A soft murmur spread through the room. Nearby, one of the students who had mocked Claire at the sinks earlier stepped forward nervously. He could not have been older than 23. "Chef Whitman," he said quietly, struggling to meet her eyes. "I am sorry." Claire studied the young man for a moment before answering. "Then learn from it," she said gently. "Because kitchens remember how you treat people long after they forget your recipes." The student nodded immediately. Another contestant approached next, then another. Some apologized directly. Others simply thanked her. Claire accepted every word with calm grace, never humiliating anyone in return. That was the part people would remember most later. Not just her brilliance, her restraint. Across the room, Adrian Vale stood alone beneath the white lights while his own staff quietly drifted away from him. Nobody confronted him. Nobody attacked him. But for the first time in his career, the room no longer bent around his ego. And he finally understood how empty authority looked once respect disappeared. Claire picked up her worn gray cap from beside the sink station and slipped it gently back onto her head. The simple motion somehow felt more powerful than every speech Adrian had given all evening. "You are leaving?" Richard Holloway asked carefully. Claire nodded once. "This was never my stage." Leonard frowned slightly. "After tonight, the entire culinary world will come looking for you again." Claire looked toward the kitchen doors at the far end of the studio where the hallway lights glowed softly beyond the cameras and steel counters. "Maybe," she replied quietly. "But there are more important things than being famous." She began walking toward the exit with calm, measured steps. Nobody stopped her. Nobody knew how to. Halfway to the doors, a young culinary student suddenly called after her. "Chef Whitman." Claire turned slightly. The student swallowed hard before asking the question everyone else seemed afraid to say out loud. "How do you become great without becoming cruel?" The room went completely still one final time. Claire stood beneath the soft hallway light, her expression calm and tired and kind all at once. Then she gave the answer that many people inside that kitchen would remember for the rest of their lives. "You remember that every person in the room is fighting a battle you cannot see," she said softly. "And you never use someone else's humiliation to feel important." No applause followed her words. None was needed. Claire Whitman simply walked through the kitchen doors and disappeared down the quiet hallway while behind her, one of the most prestigious culinary institutes in America stood in complete silence, finally remembering what dignity looked like.